I'm very excited to introduce today's author. Nicole Disney has been a storyteller since she was 12 years old. Ask her about it. In her adult life, she has worked as a 911 operator, police dispatcher, EMS dispatcher, martial arts instructor, and now as a part of a music video company. These life experiences feed into her writing. She has published books and has received first place in the 2011 Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Colorado Gold Writing Contest, as well as in the 2018 Writers Digest Short Story Competition. Today, Nicole will discuss her new book, Hers to Protect, a story of two women fighting for love amidst the violent streets of Chicago. Without further ado, let's welcome Nicole.
Hi there, my name's Nicole. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So my new book is Hers to Protect. This is the one I'm going to be talking to you guys about today. And as she said, it's about two women in love in the streets of Chicago. And I'll go ahead and just read the blurb straight from the back for you here to give you an idea of what it's about. Kaya Serrano is a police officer in the dangerous and gang-dominated streets of Chicago. She thinks she's prepared for anything, but when she responds to a bloody domestic violence call, only to find her high school sweetheart is the victim, she knows she has to find a way to help. When Adrienne Contreras' mother moved her to the south side of Chicago at 17, she quickly saw her safe life and idealistic love with Kaya replaced with poverty, crime, and violence. Now 27, Adrienne is dating Gianna, a high-ranking member of a brutal gang. She has the streets figured out, but the first rule is to never talk to cops, even one she used to be in love with. As their attraction grows into love, Adrienne and Kaya struggle to see past the changes in each other and escape Gianna and the gang, who have threatened both their lives. So it's a lesbian romance and thriller. It's kind of an intrigue, romantic suspense. It's pretty gritty, set in Chicago. So a lot of graphic violence, a lot of fast-paced action in this, and I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt for you as well. At this point in the story, Kaya and Adrienne have already met again and realized who each other are now, and this is actually after Kaya responded to that domestic violence call that was in the blurb, and that resulted in Gianna being arrested. So now at this point, Gianna is back out of jail from that event, and Adrienne is receiving a lot of pressure from Gianna and the gang to kind of prove her loyalty, and she's been asked to go with them to somebody's house to try to collect money that the gang is owed, and Adrienne has been asked to be the getaway driver. Adrienne stopped the car. She could barely breathe. This had transformed from words to reality in minutes, and now she was one twist of chance away from jail, maybe worse. She didn't have the personality for this. She'd always felt like the good kid trying to fit in with the bad ones, the one terrified person in the group of delinquents, except she was 27 now. She suddenly felt so stupid and out of place, like she'd risked her whole life for the satisfaction of talking tough. She shook it away. She wasn't going to be scared and weak. She'd been trying to overcome that version of herself her whole life. Gianna looked at her, scanning her for a reaction. "Be safe," Adrienne said. "I'll be here." Gianna smiled and kissed her. She and Anna got out of the car and quickly moved in a crouch toward the back of the house. Adrienne saw the subtle bulge of a gun in each of their waistbands. Adrienne strained to hear, but there wasn't a sound. She got paranoid, said a nosy neighbor was calling the cops, or worse yet, that someone had cameras. Gianna and Anna finally came creeping back out, apparently not in any hurry. They got in with sly smiles. "Got it, let's go." "Hold on," Anna said. "Someone just turned on the road behind us." "Cop?" Gianna asked. "I don't know. Duck. Let him pass. He's probably just driving through. He's alone." Adrienne lowered herself in the seat, trying to disappear. Her pulse thundered in her ears. They waited in silence for the car to pass, but it didn't. Gianna lifted just enough to look in the side mirror. "He's behind us. It's a cop." She slowly took her gun from her waistband. "He doesn't know if we're in the car yet. Go." "What?" Adrienne hissed. "Go. He won't chase us for this." "But he's got our plates by now." "They're not ours. I stole them." "He's walking up, Adrienne. Go." "Shit." Adrienne straightened up and hit the gas hard. The tires squealed, then finally got traction and the car jumped forward. Anna sat up and watched out the back window. "He's running back to the car. Damn, he's gonna try it. You have to hit it, girl." "You said he wouldn't chase." "Yeah, well, we got a cowboy." Gianna pulled the slide of her pistol. Adrienne saw a flash of Kaya in that car being shot at. She knew it was unlikely, the odds were absurd, but it was all she could think about. She tried to shake it away and hit the gas harder. The speedometer climbed through the 60s, 70s, up into the 80s, which felt like light speed in the quiet neighborhood. The red and blue lights were pulsing furiously, the sirens screaming. She turned, slowing a quarter of what she knew she ought to. They screeched around the corner and nearly lost control. "You got it," Gianna said, cool as could be. Adrian was shocked to find it actually helped. The street was narrow and curved constantly, impossible to speed through the way she wanted. She turned again, more of the same stretched in front of her. "How the fuck do you get out of here?" "Straight, left at the school," Gianna said. "We're okay." "I still hear him," Anna said. "He's going to have backup soon." Adrian panicked. The lights flashing around the corner again and sped towards them. "God," Adrian yelled. "Why won't he just stop?" Anna laughed. "I got it." She rolled down the window, leaned out from the waist up and fired 3 shots. His brakes locked and Adrian flew ahead. She spotted the school and turned onto a wider suburban road. She accelerated into the 90s. Before she knew it, they broke 100. She approached 110. "Yeehaw," Anna said. "All right," Gianna touched her leg. "Slow down up here and go right. He's not following anymore." "Did you hit him?" She glanced in her rear view at Anna. She shrugged. "Doubt it." They pulled over and Gianna got out and got rid of the stolen plates, putting their own back on before they went home. Back inside the house, Anna and Gianna each emptied their pockets, producing thousands of dollars. Anna counted out 1,000 and handed it to Adrian. "You did good." Gianna did the same and kissed her. "Get something you've been wanting." What she wanted was out of this relationship and away from this gang, wasn't it? Gianna leaned over and kissed her again, wrapping her arms around Adrian's waist and pulling her close. Gianna's tongue teased at her lips, parting them slowly. Adrian accepted the advance. There was something about belonging to Gianna that made her lose her mind. She was gorgeous, strong, devoted. Despite everything, Adrian loved being hers. Being accepted by her and Anna felt exactly as good as she predicted. But why was the touch of Kaya's hand on her still tingling days later? All right, so that's just one scene. It's in kind of the beginning of the novel, and that we just see her kind of wrestling with where her loyalties lie, and that's kind of the conflict that does go through the rest of the book. And just to give you a little backstory on the book, this is something that I wrote as a NaNoWriMo project. It's a National Novel Writing Month. It's a project that a lot of authors and writers try to participate in, where you try to write a novel in a month, and this was kind of one of those for me. And it took me places that I had never really gone as a writer before, because I'm usually a plotter. You know, a lot of writers talk about, are you a plotter or a pantser, meaning do you plan out the whole book in advance or do you just go for it? And typically I'm a plotter, and you just can't really do that with NaNoWriMo because there's so many words you have to get down so fast. And that is how I ended up writing this action-packed, fast-paced thing, because you kind of have to just follow those impulses and those ideas. You don't really have time to sit there and map out every little turn, so you end up with things like car chases. But I'd like to go ahead and open it up to any questions, if anyone has any. Yes?
How does writing LGBT characters affect the story?
The question was, how does writing LGBT characters affect the story? I would say it shouldn't. I mean, in my opinion, I like to write books that have LGBT characters in them. I don't write about being LGBT. There are certainly plenty of coming out stories out there, and plenty of stories about people dealing with the conflict and, you know, family conflicts, society conflicts. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of them. But if you look at kind of books that don't have LGBT characters, for example, the percentage of books that are a coming-of-age type of story, they're out there, but they're very small across the spectrum, and I feel like LGBT fiction should be the same way. There's nothing wrong with a coming-out story, but that should not be the totality of what is available to readers. We should be able to just read a story and see someone reflected in it that reminds us of ourselves without that being the focus of the entire thing. And I find that writing it that way also makes it so that people who are not LGBT can enjoy it as well, because they're not trying to connect with the experience of being gay, they're just reading a story.
What was your writing process?
What was my writing process? Well, I mean, for this one it was a little different than usual, because like I said, usually I plot. So typically my writing process is I come up with an idea, and I just let it sit in me for a while and kind of form, and then I'll start writing things down. I'll write the major events down, and then I'll go back and I'll start filling in what happens in between those. And ideally, I have the entire book in my head before I write anything, which is unusual. I mean, even amongst plotters, that's a little extreme. But it works really well for me. I don't really like to edit a whole lot, and the more you plan, the less you have to edit because you don't have to change as much. So yeah, but this one, like I said, very different, because doing NaNoWriMo, it was exactly the opposite. I set aside, basically, I crunched my normal schedule into 3 days to where I was working 3 16-hour days at my normal job. And then I was writing basically nonstop for 4 days a week. And that's how I ended up with an entire book in a little over 4 weeks. But again, then you have to edit a lot. So that ended up being a much bigger part of this book than it has been any of my others.
Have you written thrillers before? You said this was different. Was it only in the writing experience that it was different, or was it part of the genre too?
It was the genre as well. I mean, typically I've written, I like to write gritty, dark stories that handle controversial and intense issues. So in that way, the domestic violence you see in the story, the gang violence you see, the conflict between police and cops and corruption and all that, that is very much what I do. I like to write, things that challenge the way we think. So that was very much still in my vein of what I like to do. But to call it a thriller, that is different than what I usually do. I wrote another novel before this, and it came out with JMS Books. It's called Dissonance in A Minor, and that one was about a homeless musician who fell in love with a painter who became a meth addict. So that one you would call more of a romance or a literary fiction than a thriller, but still kind of you're handling the same kind of intensity and just going really kind of gritty and getting into the underbelly of society. So it's kind of the common thread through what I do.
And so did your roles and jobs in dispatch and 911 and all that guide you in the direction of the intense topics that you do discuss? Or
Yeah, I mean, I wrote intense topics even before I had that job. So I think that that's just something that I'm interested in. But at the same time, having that job certainly gave me ideas and exposed me to things that I didn't know about before and allowed me to go kind of different directions. And certainly writing a main character who is a police officer is something I would not have even thought to tackle or wanted to tackle prior to having this job. So yeah, I mean, it helps in that way a lot. And it also helps, like in the domestic violence scenes, I've heard that on the phone 1,000 times, and to write about it is so much more authentic when you've heard it and you know what that sounds like, and in a way you kind of know what it feels like because you feel like you're there with them. And of course you don't know their story or their relationship, but it does add a layer. So I'm very glad to be able to complement the writing with the police dispatching.
How did you choose the setting of Chicago? Have you spent time there, or?
How did I choose the setting of Chicago? That's a good question. Chicago, I have not ever lived there. I did go there to visit specifically for the purpose of researching this book, just because I wanted to, you do a lot of research online and you look at pictures and you read, stories for people that live there, and you try to get a feeling for it, but there's really nothing that replaces being there. So I went there to visit to supplement this, but I had already made the decision to do Chicago, and that had a lot to do with the gang violence, and it had a lot to do with the police corruption, because Chicago, things are happening there that are not happening anywhere else in the country. And it's just such an intense atmosphere there, I guess, between the police and the gang members, that I felt like it was an appropriate place to set something that has as much extreme gang violence and intensity as my book. It felt like it fit there.
Some of the bad guys are likable characters. Did you intend that?
Some of the bad guys are likable. Yes, I actually did intend that. That was actually a major part of planning this book for me, is that I did not want this to be good guys and bad guys. I wanted this to be people. And I have some chapters in here, several of them actually, that are from Gianna's perspective, so the abuser in the relationship. I have some from Anna, who's another leading member of the gang. And it was intentional because there's nothing quite like getting in the perspective of a bad guy to make you see that that's a human. Because as much as it seems simple, hitting your girlfriend's wrong. Well, of course it is. But there's a person there. And it doesn't mean that it's justified, but it does mean there's more going on there. People are not black and white. People are not typically just awful for the sake of being awful. So I'm always very interested in that, and interested in kind of trying to explain the unexplainable. You know, how does a 9-year-old pick up a gun and decide to be a gang member? That seems unexplainable on the surface. And really there's no better way to go into how that happens than to write a book about it and to become these people and write from that perspective.
So in your writing, do you often switch perspectives of narration, or was it part of this experience, or?
Yeah, as far as perspective, the book I talked about before was written in first person present tense, so that one did not have a wide range of perspective at all. It was very much you inside this one character's head. And I enjoyed writing that way because there's a closeness with that character. That way you are that person, you're saying I, you're experiencing it in real time with them. So that's a great advantage of first person. This one is in third person, and it does alternate between not only the two lead characters' perspectives, but a couple others as well. And I did that with this book specifically, again, because there are some characters that do some truly horrible things, and to me the only way to get deeper than the act was to go into that perspective. And I mean, there were some logical reasons, just there's no other way we could know this thing we need to know. But in general, it was more about how do I make you understand this person that typically you would just say, I don't like them, they're terrible. And I wanted to go deeper than that. So I felt it was more necessary in this book than some of my others to go ahead and explore those different perspectives.
And this example is different because of the time constraint, right?
Mm-hmm, yes.
But how did you manage the perspectives as you're going through the story? Like, okay, now I need to get into this character, and I need to figure out what exactly I want in the mind of Anna, or how do you manage that?
Well, I mean, between the two main characters, you kind of just want to give them both some face time. They both just need to have a certain amount, a fairly equal amount of time, otherwise you're going to attach more to one or understand one more than the other. So as far as the two leads, if you want to keep them both leads, they both need a certain amount of ink on the page that is theirs. Where it got a little more complicated is, like you said, those other characters, Gianna and Anna, who typically you probably wouldn't see them have a perspective. But I brought them into it. Gianna I brought into it because I really just thought she was an interesting character. I didn't want her to just be a single-minded bad guy. And you pepper it in there, but you don't want it to take over the story too much. So I just I thought about it in almost like a page ink kind of way. How much face time does Gianna get? And then with Anna, she snuck up on me, actually. Anna ended up being a much more major character than I planned. She was kind of a secondary character who wasn't going to get a chapter or anything from her perspective. She was kind of one of the more true, just bad guys originally in my plan. And as the story went on, she just kept coming to the forefront more, and I was like, there's something here. And I think that's when you know you're onto something when you're writing, when your book starts to talk to you or fight you, or characters that weren't supposed to matter suddenly matter, or you had a plan for this chapter and then by the end something totally different happened. It's frustrating, but to me that's when you know it's working, because you've made a character that's full-bodied enough that they're talking to you, they're fighting you. So she pretty much just asked me for some pages and I gave them to her. Any other questions?
Can you tell us about your being a storyteller since you were 12 years old?
Sure, yeah. So my first experience trying to tell stories, I was actually in school, and I had an assignment, and it was around Halloween time, and they told us to write a little Halloween story. And, everyone went off and started writing, and, pretty soon it was the end of class, and everyone was done, and I was like, well, I'm not even close to done. I'm just getting started. And I realized what I was doing is I was playing a much bigger story than anyone else. Everyone else wrote a page and they were done with it. And I realized that this was like a very small piece of the story I really wanted to tell. So I took it home and I kept writing, and I ended up with like a 70-page horror novel about serial killers. All the worst serial killers in history have now found a way to come back to life, and they're just running around killing everyone. So, so that's the story I wrote when I was 12. I was very impressed with my word count. I think it ended up, it was about 70 pages, which for me at that age, I thought was, I was Stephen King, basically. So from there, then I went into fantasy, because that's what I was reading at the time. You know, it was the big Harry Potter craze and Lord of the Rings and all that. That's what I was reading and enjoying, so I tried to write it. And I wrote one of those, and that actually ended up being full length. That was about 80,000 words. And I ended up working with an editor on that one who was very sweet to me in some ways and very just treated me like an adult. You know, I was 14 by that age, so that was my first experience with some really harsh critique. And I wasn't really expecting it, but at the same time I was complimented that she was talking to me like I was a real writer. So that, and then I wrote another fantasy after that, and then eventually next I found my way into Dissonance in A minor, which is when it kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, okay, I don't need to write fantasy, I need to write this. And then that ended up being my first publication.
I have a question.
Okay.
So NaNoWriMo, what's the word count on that, and how much did you end up doing?
NaNoWriMo. So I believe the minimum that they ask you to complete to be considered a novel, I think, is 50,000 words, which is a very short novel or a very long novella. And I ended up doing 80,000, and that was just the full book. I didn't even really think at the time that I was exceeding the goal by 30,000 words. I didn't even think about it in those terms. I just thought you write a book in a month, and this is how long my book needs to be, so that became my goal.
Questions?
Yeah, questions, anyone?
Are you planning to do NaNoWriMo again?
NaNoWriMo again, ooh.
Oh, God.
Yes and no. I don't know if I'll ever do it officially like that again, but once you realize you're capable of writing that much, that fast, it's hard not to keep pushing yourself to do it again. And, you know, I have a lot of projects in mind that, you know, if I could crank them out that quickly, why not? I think I'll probably shoot for 2 months, because 1 month was just a little too fast. It was a little uncomfortable. I felt like I could have saved myself some trouble actually by slowing down, because I think all the time I saved writing it in a month, I probably lost editing it later. So I think 2 months is probably a little more comfortable. But I mean, I recommend it definitely, because I learned a lot about myself as a writer going through that process, and it definitely accelerated my pace. Like, even if I don't go quite that fast, I know I can now.
What's one of your bigger takeaways? You said you learned a lot about yourself as a writer. Is there anything you'll take forward with you as you...
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson is don't save your big ideas. Because I used to have this kind of notion that, like, oh, I've got this great idea for a scene, I'm going to turn that into the climax. I'm gonna save that for this where I need a really intense moment. And I kind of, with NaNoWriMo, you just have to keep writing. If you don't have an idea, you're forced to use that idea you have now, just for the sake of continuing. But I found that it actually helped the book overall not to try to hold those ideas back, and because then you end up with a lot of filler trying to get to your idea. So don't fill and then reach your idea. If you've got an idea, just use the idea, and guess what? You're going to get another one. Just trust that you're going to get another one.
Are you working on anything else right now?
I am. Yes, I've actually got another novel coming out on October 16th, so that one's pretty much done. We're in production doing final edits on that one. And that one is about social workers. That one's set in the South, and it's about 2 social workers. It's a forbidden workplace romance thing. One's the supervisor, the other is her new hire. And there's also a lot of just dealing with kind of poverty and just like deep south where they're really struggling, and a lot of the themes deal with, family and when is it safe for a child to be in a home, when do they need to be removed, where are those lines, and is it important for them to have money, is it important for them to have love, where's the balance? So it deals with the social workers' cases as well as the workplace romance. And then now I'm currently also writing a new literary fiction novel, and that one is called Of Liquid Amber, and it's a family saga set in Tennessee, also deep south, dealing kind of with some of the southern cultures down there and the ideals about image and just exactly what it means to be successful. Yes.
Do you actually do very much research before you start writing
Do I do very much research?
on the subject?
I do, yeah. It varies. For this one, for Hers to Protect, a lot of what I needed to research was Chicago, because I was not familiar with it, but I knew I wanted it to be there, so I kind of had to do a lot to figure out how am I going to make this feel authentic to someone that is from Chicago. And the last thing you want is to set a book somewhere and then someone who's from there is like, no, this isn't it. So I did a lot of research on that. It just depends, though, on story to story. With this one, like, I was able to write the police officer character without really much research at all, because that's my job. But it varies, and definitely anything you don't know about, I try to research it extensively. And a lot of the times, my books end up being about topics I want to know more about. So it'll be something that interests me. I'll say, hey, that's strange. I bet there's a story there. And then you go and do the research so that you can write the book.
What's your favorite book you've written?
My favorite book I've written? Wow. That's so hard because they're like my babies. You can't pick one. I love them all for different reasons. I really loved Dissonance in A Minor because it was very poetic and I felt very kind of swept up with the emotions of that one. This one, Hers to Protect, I liked just because it was so hard-hitting, and the intensity of this one I really liked. I liked the pace. I liked that it has that page-turner quality where you can really get lost in it and you can read it in a sitting or two. Secrets on the Clock, my next one, I really liked that one because it's a little bit more theme-driven. This one was very action-packed. This one's a lot more theme-driven. It's a lot more about family and love and poverty. So I like that it kind of dives into that. And I just love them all for different reasons. I don't think I can pick one.
Okay. How much time do you spend writing?
How much time do I spend writing? I'm a binge writer. A lot of people will just have a daily word count that they tell themselves they have to hit. I do that sometimes if I'm under a deadline and I have to, but in general, I will not write for a couple of days, which is weird. I think I'm in the minority there among writers, but then I'll sit down and I'll write 10,000 words, which is a lot. So I am a binge writer. I know that a lot of people think that you need to have a discipline where you sit down from 7 to 10 every day, but I just can't really work like that. So I'll have a deadline overall. So I need to be a quarter of the way through the book by this date, and then I'll make that happen. And then I'll be like, I need to be done by this date, and I'll make that happen. But as far as on a day-to-day basis, I kind of just have to take it one step at a time and just see what happens.
How do you track your ideas? Do you physically write them down, or like you said, because you just plot a lot and let things ruminate, and then you're like, okay, let me get all this out?
Yeah, I live in my head a lot. I actually have to force myself to write it down because sometimes I will fool myself into thinking I'll remember. And I've lost enough ideas that way that I finally started writing them down. But I don't live on paper very much in the beginning at all. I like to just kind of let it sit and I do a lot of daydreaming. And, and then once I have an idea that gives me that, yes, that's a good thing, then I make myself go write it down. And then, then I switch to paper mode, and when I do my first draft, I actually handwrite it all. So when I go to paper, I live in it, but I avoid it at first. I like to just kind of let things happen, almost, like in a dreamland where they're just kind of abstract and just moving around, and I feel like it kind of starts to weave itself together better that way.
When did you know you wanted to be a writer for sure?
For sure. Well, I mean, I started writing when I was really little, but it didn't occur to me until I think 16 that that was a real job. I didn't know that you could really do that. I thought it was just kind of this thing that I enjoyed, and then I think I was 15 or 16 when I realized, hey, that's a profession. And pretty much from the moment I had that epiphany, I was committed to it.
Do you have an agent?
I do not have an agent. I've tried to get one, and at first I kind of thought you had to have one. That was when I started researching it. I thought it was a necessity. And then somewhere along the way, I was going to writers' conferences, I was talking to other authors, and I started finding out that a lot of them did not have one. And then I said, well, how does that work? How do you get a publisher without an agent? And I started finding out that a lot of publishers let you just approach them. You can just submit to them. And granted, an agent can do that for you, but you can do it for yourself as well. You're not necessarily going to get one of the big 6 or the big 5, I guess it is now. But you can get a very reputable publisher simply by approaching them. It's a little bit tougher because they don't know you, and they're going to look at agent queries first. But if you put together a good query and you're relentless, you'll eventually get one. I played this game with myself where for every rejection I got, I sent out 5 more queries. And that really worked because one, it made me feel better. You get a rejection, and even if you knew it was a long shot, it's never fun. But if you send out 5 more submissions, immediately you have hope again, and you're waiting on something to pop in your inbox again. And plus, I mean, you're adding to your productivity every time you do that. So I kind of just try to turn it into a game, and yeah, eventually someone says, "Hey, we like it."
How did you get into the Tattered cover? That seems pretty big.
I actually just approached them and asked. I love this bookstore, so I was thinking about where I could do this event, and I was like, oh, well, I'd love to do it at Tattered Cover, but surely you can't do that. But then I went on and I saw where their little authors events page and looked at their requirements, and I said, actually, I could maybe do that. And they said yes. I'm very happy to be here, so thank you, Tattered Cover. But yeah, that just goes to the same thing with the publisher. A lot of these big, scary people are a lot more approachable than they seem. The worst thing they can do is say no. And so far, I'm having pretty good luck with some yeses. So.
What's your perspective on muses?
Muses. I think it's a very romanticized name for creativity, basically. But I do like it. I like this idea that you can kind of just let it happen. I think that when you believe in the idea of a muse, you take pressure off of yourself. And when you do that, you start to fire in a more creative place. Because when you're thinking, I need an idea. I'm not inspired, I can't write, I need an idea. When you start thinking that way, you're going to the very logical part of your brain where you're saying, idea, where is it? And really, it's the exact opposite is what you need. You need to be in that more free-form place to have an idea. So I think believing in a muse lets you turn that logical part of your brain off, and then you start getting ideas. So I'm not sure I believe in it literally, but I do believe that tricking your brain into that and lets it start operating the way you need it to. Anybody else? Okay, well, I think go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what kind of stuff do you read yourself?
Oh, I read all kinds of stuff. I will read just about anything. Like I said, I had an early love for fantasy, so I still have a soft spot for that. I think it's a lot like music. Whatever you fall in love with first, you're kind of always going to love. But then, also, of course, I read a lot of LGBT fiction because that's where I'm publishing right now. So you've got to know what's out there. You've got to know what people are liking. You've got to know, what is catching on with people and what they're not liking. And just also knowing what's been done so that you're not repeating. So I read a lot of my own genre just because I feel like that's a professional necessity. But just for fun, I like fantasy. I like a lot of dark fiction too. I actually recently looked up most controversial books of all time and bought like all of them. So I kind of go in waves like that as well too, where I'll just have a topic that I'm interested in and I'll just read 20 of those in a row, and then I'll think of something else and I'll go read 20 of those.